The views expressed on this podcast are ours alone and do not reflect the views of our employers.
Evolution of Evil.
I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep. That's when they would be strangled.
Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Evil is not spurned. Evil is thought of as a spirit that needs help.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
Evolution of Evil.
Nine episodes in, and that intro still sounds creepy. Hello and welcome to the true crime podcast, Evolution of Evil, the show where we will relive some of the more awful and horrific crimes while also diving into the human psyche that makes these crimes possible. Please remember to subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and follow the show on Twitter at Evolution of EVI2, as well as our personal accounts. I'm at Justin Yent, and he's at TStevens91. TJ, tell us what we're getting into today.
So there's a lot to discuss. So this, as everyone knows, I've been doing a block of Netflix documentaries here. It started, now it'd be 4 episodes ago, with, what did I start off with? Oh, Murder Among the Mormons. And then after that, it was Our Father about Dr. Donald Klein. A lot of feedback on that guy, as there should have been. This week is going to be Evil Genius, which is possibly the most diabolical thing I've ever seen. And then my next topic, episode 11, will be The Keepers, the Netflix documentary. And then I'm not sure where I'm going to go from there. I've gotten some interesting ideas, some things I've discovered in the last couple days or so. Actually researching my other show, I've stumbled across some stuff. So this is all because this is what y'all voted on. This is what you wanted. So I got to tell you, Justin, this is episode number 9. So we've been going for, I don't know, 2 months and a week, somewhere in there. And we've had people from the field of small town bird lawyers. We've got people in law enforcement trying to get on this show. I never thought that would happen. And are they going to be on the show? Indeed. We just don't know when yet.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, we've already challenged Amy. She's just got to pick a number of what episode she wants. It's hers. I
was actually alarmed when you asked her what she wanted to cover, and she knew it immediately. That kind of freaked me out, especially when I realized the story that she wants to cover.
Yeah, I think we're all together in June. I think that'd be a great time to record an episode together. So
quite possibly us in Alabama, Huntsville. Yeah. We'll get together called Top Guy Weekend.
Yes.
I'll be down there. But this little get together that happened in this story, not so fun.
No.
And again, it's the most diabolical thing I've ever heard.
Let's just get into it.
Yeah. When the story is multi-layered, and when you think you figured one out, screw getting another layer. An onion just hits you in the head, and you have to start over again. So, again, this story I'm covering today, the Netflix documentary, Evil Genius, the story of a bank heist gone wrong in Erie, Pennsylvania. So, to properly tell this story, I'm going to have to break this down by events that occurred as well as the people that were involved. This is the most detailed I've been so far on this show, easily. I had to be, because if I wasn't, it didn't make sense. So I had to make sure I hit everything. Because it's like a really good suspense movie. If you have to leave and go to the bathroom and you don't pause it, when you come back, you're done. You're out. You don't know what happened. So we're going to start with a man named Brian Wells. He was a pizza delivery man. He lived in Erie, Pennsylvania, and from all accounts was a fairly quiet, kept to himself, but a pleasant guy. He lived with his mother. He really liked cats, and he loved scavenger hunts. Who doesn't? He'd certainly never had a brush with the law, so it surprised everyone who knew Brian when they suddenly saw him on TV one day sitting in a parking lot of an Erie strip mall with a bomb around his neck shortly after robbing a PNC bank. So I'm gonna repeat the key facts of that sentence just to make sure it absorbed. He's sitting cross-legged in a parking lot of a strip mall with a bomb around his neck shortly after he robbed a bank. Now, there are crazier things about the bank story. I'm not going to tell them right now because they don't quite fit with the story. But I'm going to say them when the time is right. And unfortunately, a lot of these other shows, I'll be like, keep this in your mind. We're going to come back to it. You have to keep this whole show in your mind because I'm going to come back to all of it as time goes on. So, as the scene unfolds, mind you, this is on the local news. Him sitting in this program. Because it looks like every police officer in the state of Pennsylvania is there. So they're also waiting. I forgot to mention this too. He's already been handcuffed. So his hands are behind his back. The police are nowhere near him. They're surrounding the area. They've cordoned off the area. They're waiting for the bomb squad to arrive. Well, the police have blocked off the major street leading through the town, which is where he is. Strip mall right off the main drag. This made it incredibly difficult for the bomb squad to arrive. Adding to the length of time it took for the bomb squad to arrive, Wells was arrested 15 minutes after the robbery. Okay. Not in itself a big deal, but the bomb squad was first called at 3:04 in the afternoon. 30 minutes after the initial 911 call from the bank. So the bomb squad's called a half an hour after he robbed the bank, which is 15 minutes after he'd been arrested, and they knew there was a bomb around his neck. Now, I'm not trying to perceive there's shady things going on, but it is intriguing. What exactly took 15 minutes? The bomb squad arrived at 3:18, and shortly after they arrived, the bombs started to beep before any attempt had been made to disarm it. Now, I should also mention, up to this point, Wells has been borderline pleasant with the police officers sitting in the parking lot with the bomb around his neck. Again, more on that in a little bit. But when that beep started, his demeanor changed. He started getting squirmish, and he's still not really agitated, but he's speaking loudly to the police. Do you think you guys can come over here and disarm this? I think you should get it off now. It's chilling to listen to, really. Then it explodes, blasting a hole in Wells's chest the size of a fist, killing him in seconds. The ABC television affiliate in Erie, WJET-TV, was airing the situation unfolding with the arrest of Brian Wells. But luckily, when the bomb detonated, the station had technical difficulties, so it didn't actually air. Thank goodness. The footage was then released to the FBI and the ABC affiliate in Buffalo, New York. Now, I didn't include this, but I might as well bring it up because it entered my head. It said that this footage leaked to a shock jock in Washington, D.C., and they put it on their website. Eventually, the Erie ABC affiliate told him to take it down. By the time he did, it had been spread everywhere because he's a shock jock and they have no talent. So they have to rely on things like this. While searching Brian Wells' car, a letter was found that essentially mapped out this elaborate scavenger hunt that someone had sent Wells on. The explosive device around Wells' neck had a box on his chest, a steel box, and this encased the pipe bomb with a cell phone and a timer, both of which, after reconfiguring the bomb later, was discovered they did nothing. It was just to confuse the bomb squad when they arrived. The collar had keyholes in it. And as Wells went to the locations the scavenger hunt letter told him to go to, allegedly each location had a key, and when he inserted the key into the device and turned it, it would give him more time. So this is all described in this letter. Days later, investigators drove the route at a similar time of day with similar weather conditions that Wells would have been traveling. They figured out, even under optimal conditions, Wells could not have made the whole route in time. So he was doomed from the beginning. But again, more on this later. Yes, sir. Okay. So this was August 28th, 2003. It was believed that Wells went somewhere to deliver a pizza, was jumped, and had the collar put on him.
TJ, I'll admit, while I tried to watch this documentary a long time ago, and I really thought the collar was fake, and I was like, all right, I'm not getting into this. This is crazy. Now, you pick this one, so we've made a pact that we're going to watch everything that the others reporting on, right?
Yep.
And so for this episode, I decided to watch it again. And when that collar detonated, I couldn't believe it. I think my exact text to you was, holy shit, they actually blew off his head. To me, I thought they blew off his head. It was a lot to unpack within the first episode, within the first 30, 45 minutes, especially where law enforcement felt that Wells was more of a threat to them and society and didn't really believe him. It was like the little boy who cried wolf, right?
Well, there was something I didn't mention that didn't help his case any. So if you remember initially when he's first arrested, he says a bunch of black guys jumped him and put the collar on. And you can tell when the investigators said it, they're all like, okay, sure. I know that's not true.
Yeah. But I mean, how awful must they have felt being there and watching Wells die a brutal death right in front of them and later finding out that he was telling the truth all along? I mean, it reminded me something out of the movie Saw, Gone Bad, pretty much. Mm-hmm. The problem doing these true crime podcasts are covering sick son of a bitches who do shit like this to people.
Yes.
And then having to talk about it, right?
Yeah. So again, we're first paragraph into the show. There's already a bombing death with like you said, something that looks like a prop from the movie Saw. And I'm willing to bet I'll go ahead and say this. I'll say everyone that was there that responded to it thought it was fake until the beeping started. Because it was a very loud, pronounced beep that you couldn't miss. And then again, the whole scenario changed. So now we need to figure out why any of this happened. Was it in fact a bunch of black guys that jumped him and put the collar on him? Spoiler alert, no. And if not, then who? Did he do this to himself? But again, he's had no history of trouble in the past. Let's work through this. So 3 days later, Wells' co-worker at the same pizza place. Matter of fact, he was the other delivery driver. They only had two. This is a mom and pop shop. It's not like a Little Caesars. That Wells worked at, Robert Panetti was his name. He was found dead from an apparent drug overdose in his apartment. 20 days after the death of Panetti, a resident by the name of Bill Rothstein called the Erie police saying that there was a dead body inside of a chest freezer in his garage. His garage. There's a dead body in a freezer in his garage. Okay. Upon arriving at the home of Rothstein, investigators realized that the location of the home was essentially across the street from the television tower site that the scavenger hunt started with because that's where Wells went to deliver the pizza for the last time. And the address was this tower, which I didn't know towers had addresses, but they do. When the police apprehended Rothstein and searched the house, a suicide note was found that Rothstein had written, but never followed through with the suicide. As a matter of fact, investigators suspect he was never going to. They think it was, hey, don't look over here. The note specified that his potential suicide had nothing to do with the death of Brian Wells. Okay. We didn't ask. Why did you bring it up? But this is only going to get weirder. So go ahead, get ready. Grab something to eat. And actually, maybe not grab something to drink. Don't grab something to eat. The body was frozen in the fetal position in the freezer. So the police had to wait for the freezer to thaw to be able to get the body out. An autopsy was performed on the body, and it was found to be James Roden. Who is this guy? Investigators then pressed Rothstein for information, whereas Rothstein revealed that Roden's girlfriend of 10 years, Marjorie Deal Armstrong, the star of this show, in a negative way, shot him with a 12-gauge shotgun, then paid Rothstein $2,000 to hide the body. Now, Justin, we're pretty good friends. If you killed someone, and for whatever reason drove them to Indiana, and also it should be known I have an upright freezer, not a chest, and you told me, killed this guy, here's $2,000, put him in your freezer, I would tell you I could have saved you a trip, because no to all of that. Especially not for $2,000. And it's not like this is 1950, it's 2003. The money is not that different. So before we make the link between Marjorie and Rothstein, let's give background on both people. Bill Rothstein was the son of a wealthy family led by his father, who owned a popular soda pop company. Rothstein was incredibly intelligent and a huge man by all accounts, but was often made fun of as a child because of his Jewish heritage, because he grew up in the 60s. He went to college, but eventually dropped out to come back home, where he became a handyman and a part-time shop teacher. He inherited his father's money. At his passing, and was widely considered what at the time was called a fractured intellectual. What does that mean? This means it's an incredibly intelligent person, unlike my speaking, who was not well adjusted to society, which we now refer to as Asperger's, and is on the autism spectrum. And listening, you see interrogations of this man throughout the documentary. Absolutely. Absolutely. In the late 1960s and early 70s, he dated a woman by the name of Marjorie Deal. The two matched initially because they were both high on the intellectual level. And Marjorie was also an accomplished musician playing the violin. She even obtained a master's degree from Gannon College for sociology. They're very decorated people for what we're about to discuss. In her mid-20s, her mental health started to deteriorate as she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which in the 1960s meant just throwing pills at her. I'm not even sure bipolar was a thing. Her first major run-in with the law was in 1984, when her boyfriend Robert Thomas was shot 6 times while he laid on the couch by Marjorie, but she was acquitted due to claims of self-defense. He was laying on the couch. She shot him 6 times.
Sounds like something out of the Chicago musical.
Yes.
He ran into my knife. He ran into my knife 6 times.
Yes. Unless we find out that Robert Thomas was Spider-Man. I'm not sure he's that big of a threat on the couch. But right there's I shouldn't make fun of that, because there is this phenomenon of battered women killing their husbands in a non-threatening position because they just mentally snap, they can't take anymore, and that can still be considered self-defense. It's happened as precedent.
I would agree, TJ, and I think we're only making light of it because we've seen the full documentary.
Yes.
If it would have been a one-off situation, I don't think either one of us would have made light of of the situation.
Right.
So I think you're going to go deeper into what she's capable of and her mental state, correct?
Yes. Matter of fact, speaking of deeper, go ahead and put on your board shorts, because her husband, which is where the Armstrong part of her name comes from, also died of suspicious circumstances, as well as a few other boyfriends. Okay. So essentially, we have a serial killer here, but no one realized it because it was the 60s. Or, I mean, even in 84. I mean, we've discussed this before, I think with the Bell Gunnis episode, our first one. The term serial killer wasn't even coined until 1979. So in 84, it's still new.
And at that point, they were only figuring that men were serial killers. It was not a women's perspective, right?
Right.
So
very rarely. Actually, I would say never. They probably knew. Well, actually, I don't know, because serial killer was. No, they definitely knew, because the behavioral science. I don't know why I'm talking about this, but the behavioral science unit, Quantico, traveled the country and interviewed what they perceived to be violent killers, eventually turning it into serial killers. Richard Speck. What was the shoe guy in San Francisco? I can't remember his name. Anyway, you get the point. Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, stuff like that. So, fast forward to now. Rothstein's being interrogated because there was a dead guy in his freezer. And as he's sitting at the table in front of police, this is the first words that he says, according to the investigators. Just so you know, I'm the smartest guy in the room. Way to endear yourself. As he tells his tale, he flips on Diehl Armstrong nearly immediately, which leads to her arrest. As soon as she's arrested, she's screaming at television cameras, because by now this is a huge story, right? It's been a month after the Wells bombing. She's yelling, Rothstein's a liar. And I love that she calls him Rothstein as if any of the rest of us know who he is. I need a first name. But he's a liar. He's going to get sued by her, and she needs a good lawyer. On a personal note, when she's arrested in the documentary, you can see it in her eyes. Then, there's nothing there. And I mean emotionally. No remorse, no soul, nothing. Just the abyss in both eyes. As she's in jail awaiting trial, Rothstein is free because he's helping investigators, taking him through the house where he dismembered the body. He dismembered the body. He did. He dismembered the body. He told them he did. Where he threw Rodden's mattress that he was shot on in his house, which would have been a prime candidate for the show hoarders. Actually, of all the people involved in this show, they're all pretty gross. Actually, I believe the only house that was relatively neat was Wells, and he lived with his mother. So it's kind of cheating. He also showed the investigators where the bedroom was in which Roden was shot. This is probably the most baffling part of this entire case. Rothstein is never arrested. Why?
Yeah, I thought it was amazing to see that this guy actually admits to being an accomplice to murder after the fact and helps dismember and dispose of the body in the freezer. He waits until it was convenient for him to turn her in. He actually calls 911 while he's out of the house and says, hey, I know where you can find a dead body.
Yep.
Oh, by the way, I also know who did it. And the 911 operator's like,
what?
Excuse me, can you come again? I don't think I heard you in my good ear. And literally, he's like, yeah, my girlfriend killed this person. So then they send the cop out there, and he's apparently known to the cop. So they're having a conversation, and he's like, yeah, she was really, not happy with this guy, decided to go ahead and just kill him, and then called me over to dispose of the body. And then basically gets the only Monopoly get-out-of-free jail card that I've ever seen in the world, and uses it right there and then. the funnier part is, to me, it not only had me completely puzzled, but it had my skin crawling due to the condition of how they lived. I mean, you discussed hoarders, TJ. This could have been on extreme hoarders. Um, Everywhere that they looked, there was piles of stuff. And he spoke about her condition when she's taken into jail. This lady definitely came across cold and callous during the scene in the documentary, almost drugged to the point where it was like not good.
Yeah.
I thought he came across fascinating though, and enigmatic, as he was like an integral part of the documentary. First, he alerted the police to the dead body in the freezer, right? And he was throwing suspicion off of himself the whole time. I thought, like, hey, let me show you all this. Let me walk you through this, and kind of, hey, look over there. You know, just continuously trying to put suspicion off of himself. But regardless, law enforcement always appreciated the information and kept going back to him to get more information from him, as they felt she was the prime suspect, right?
So here's why I love Rothstein. And I love in like, love is definitely not the word. It's the inverse of that. I don't hate him. He's just weird. And as we go on, why would he be a part of the story if he wasn't much more involved than what he's letting on? He is. We're going to get there eventually. But, and here's the thing. Like, first of all, with the house, it was gross. It's the second grossest house on the show. There's one worse, and we're going to get to that one soon. Rothstein, he's incredibly intelligent. Everyone on the show was like, he's like puzzlingly smart. And he knows it. And you can tell, because even when he's trying to be normal, he's arrogant as hell.
Yeah, like, hey, I'm the smartest guy in the room.
That's how you start an interrogation. Just so y'all know, you're dumb. In my bib overalls, which is what he was wearing. So let's get back to the investigation and to the dirtiest house on the show. The investigation leads the FBI to the home of Brian Wells, who has said is probably well manicured because his mother lived with him. They find a list of people that Wells knew, including 2 female sex workers, which was hidden from members of Wells's family, which, of course, I don't think he's going to tell his mom, like, hey, can you leave later? We've got some business going on. One of the sex workers, Jessica Hoopsick, knew a crack dealer by the name of Kenneth Barnes, and Barnes's home was used for sex work, which, again, he would have been on extreme horrors. This guy was gross. So now enter Kenneth Barnes. He was a former television repairman who was now selling crack, having sex workers work out of his house, apparently just shits on his own floor, because that got brought up, and was a fishing pal of Marjorie Deal Armstrong. Oh, how the spider web builds itself. It's beautiful sometimes. Barnes reveals to the FBI that Marjorie had offered to pay Barnes a handsome sum of money to kill her father. It was less than, pick a number in your head, it was less than that. We're adding a new wrinkle to this story. So here we go, a little bit more into Marge's life here. Because there's not a lot of information on Barnes. Just know he's a trash human being. Marjorie's father had amassed roughly $1 million over the course of his life, and in retirement, decided he was going to spend his money buying cars for his neighbors, doing home improvements for his friends, stuff like that. Essentially using his money to help other people. This angered Miss Marjorie because she was under the impression that he was spending her inheritance. Wild card, Marjorie wasn't even in the will because her father didn't trust what she'd use the money for. Apparently hiring someone to kill you, and then she's going to pick a freezer to hide you in. And then pay that person also. Barnes said he had no plans of killing her father, but just wanted to see if he could get the money. Sure. By the way, I believe the total was $25,000. And I'm bringing that up now because it's going to come up later. So quick recap of what we got, because there's a lot of information here. Brian Wells robs a bank with a bomb collar around his neck. And he's inevitably killed. Bill Rothstein reveals the frozen dead body of James Roden, who was killed by Marjorie Dale Armstrong and was stuffed in his freezer. Totally normal things. The home that contained the freezer was just on the road from where Brian Wells delivered his last pizza and had the bomb collar put on. As the trial begins, each person involved is implicating the other. It's actually hilarious to watch the interrogation videos, and they're just pointing fingers everywhere at each other. And here's the best part. They're telling all these stories to implicate each other. And everyone's story is different. Not one person's story matches anything with the other one. It's great. They're the most disorganized group of people ever. So is it really? Certainly not everyone can be innocent in this. So what's going on here? During the trial on July 30th, 2004, when investigators, remember the bombing happened in August of 2003. When investigators were figuring out that Rothstein had more to do with the crime. So they're picking up that Rothstein is much more involved than he was implicating or letting them to believe. He's probably the one that built the bomb. He dies in the hospital from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Up until his death, Rothstein denied any involvement. Matter of fact, one of the investigators said he went up to his hospital room one day when he found out he had cancer, and he said, "Bill, are you ready to talk yet?" And he said Bill stuck his hand up out of the hospital bed and with his pointer finger wrote the word no. What a guy. What a guy. Now, during the trial, we get some eyewitness testimony in the footage from the bank that Wells robbed. Brian Wells not only walked into this bank asking for $250,000 and leaving with less than 10 because it's a bank. They don't just have massive cash reserves on hold in the back in a safe in Erie, Pennsylvania. He was incredibly calm and even grabbed the lollipop from the counter and twirled his cane as he walked out the door. By the way, the cane, it was a cane, but it was also a shotgun. The gun was built by, guess who won the pony? Bill Rothstein. Weird. One of the investigators who drove the route said he passed by a blue Chevy Astro van on the dirt road that led back to the television tower. A very similar van was found in the front yard of Bill Rothstein. And actually, I didn't put this in, but I should have. Investigators said when they went to the Rothstein home, and he show them the bedroom, the mattress, where he dismembered the bodies, there was no van there. But the documentarian who ended up becoming fascinated with the story drove down to meet Bill Rothstein, and suddenly there's a blue Chevy Astro van in the front yard. Why? Because he was no longer considered a suspect.
Yeah, and when the documentarian asked Marjorie, like, hey, did he own a blue van? She said yes, and he would switch out cars regularly.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be like, hey, no, he just got it after. No, he had it. He just made sure to switch out.
Mm-hmm. So, a very similar van. I just said that. We'll move on to the next sentence. An eyewitness account puts Marjorie and Rothstein at the Shell gas station in town, calling from a payphone, at the same time that Brian Wells got the phone call to deliver the pizza to the television tower. So, everyone knows that Marjorie, Barnes, and Rothstein are connected, but they cannot figure out how. Again, they're all pointing fingers at the other person. None of the stories matched. They know they're all guilty, but they just don't know how. Who is responsible for what? How did this happen? There's one missing final piece. Remember the name Jessica Hoopsick from earlier? One of the sex workers Brian Wells knew. Actually, the documentary, they said they had become friends, which is actually, it was kind of beautiful when I heard that part of the story. So she initially wanted to speak with the creator of this documentary on Netflix, but ultimately declined. Hoopsick was actually, she didn't decline, she just didn't show up. Hoopsick was also in prison at the time and overheard that Marjorie was talking some mad shit about Jessica Hoopsick. Called her, like, not to be frank, but a crack whore and all this other stuff. So when Hoopsick was released from prison, her testimony put all the pieces together. She was ready to talk. Barnes, Rothstein, and Diehl Armstrong concocted this whole plan as a way to pay Ken Barnes to kill Marjorie's father. Hoopsick, who was there, said she knew a guy who was timid and would probably be a pushover, and that guy was Brian Wells. For her trouble, she was paid in a little bit of cash and drugs. Then at the site where the bomb collar was put on, Hoopsick said that initially Wells was told the bomb was fake and to just go with the plan. That's why he's walking in the bank with a lollipop in his mouth, twirling a cane gun, and then sitting there calmly with the bomb around his neck in a parking lot until it started beeping. He thought it was fake until he realized it wasn't. He didn't want to, struggled, and eventually it was essentially ganged up by Rothstein, Diehl Armstrong, Barnes, and a new name, Floyd Stockton, who there's some scummy ass people in this story. He might be the worst one. Actually, he is the worst one, no question. Even with Marjorie being, the black widow of all these boyfriends, this dude, Floyd, what's his name? Stockton. He was a fugitive living at Rothstein's home. Fugitive, meaning on the run from the law. What crime did he commit to be a fugitive, you ask? He was convicted of raping a disabled teenager. Let's let that sink in for a second. A disabled teenager. A young teenager at that. You can guess my drift. Stockton was granted immunity for his testimony, not from that, but from being charged in this. But when he was called to testify, not only was he in prison in California because he got caught, he was also suffering from acute respiratory failure, and he ended up dying actually just last year. With this new revealing testimony from Hoopsick, Diehl Armstrong was sentenced to life in prison on November 1st, 2010. Kenneth Barnes was also imprisoned and named an unindicted co-conspirator. Marjorie denied her role in the crime until April 4th, 2017, when she died of breast cancer. Kenneth Barnes said he enjoyed prison because he had a place to live, hot food, no drugs or booze, and he had people to talk to every day. He would die on June 20th, 2019, from complications from diabetes. As for Brian Panetti, he's the only loophole in this story that was never really fully figured out. It's not, they don't know to what extent he was involved, if at all. They think he was, and they think he overdosed on purpose from guilt. This whole scenario is, again, it's diabolical to the T. It's horrendous. It's literally evil. And no one deserves this. I can't imagine, because again, we found out some things about Brian Wells' past no one else knew. He's not exactly a saint walking down the street, but that doesn't mean he's a bad guy either. So he pays sex workers. A lot of people do. Doesn't make him terrible people. And again, the one, he had a favorite, Jessica Hoopsick. They became friends, which again is kind of beautiful when you think about it. But no one deserves this. And I can't imagine what was going through Brian Wells' head mere seconds after that bomb started to beep. And he realized it's not a game. As he's sitting in the parking lot, surrounded by people who can help him. And yet none of them do. It's a sad story.
I can't think of an episode where karma came around like a bitch and took care of every one of them.
That was a perfect way of saying that, because I didn't know how to say, I'm not upset about it, how they died.
Yeah, and I will say I never want to see someone suffer or die or anything. Cancer is an awful thing. At the end of the day, here's what I'm going to say. Karma is a bitch. It will come around, and at some point, it will collect itself and take over what is owed to it. And I think each of these people got what was coming to them, whether it was death or having to live with themselves in prison or having to suffer something like their victims.
That is the wildest part of the story. I think what separates it from the rest and why it's not very satisfying to hear the ending of this is one of the few stories we've done that no one survived in the long run. No one's left except for Jessica Hoopstick.
Well, she didn't kill anybody.
I mean, she had a hand in it, but
she did.
Well, I mean, and so let's discuss that. So yeah, she did. Here's Brian Wells. I know this guy. He's a big candy ass. You can push him right over and do whatever you want. Addiction's a hell of a thing. And Kenneth Barnes was feeding her crack, paid her with crack for Brian Wells, and also was using his house, as gross as it was, to do her sex work and make money and probably get more crack. So, and you may be sitting there wherever you listen to the show, like that's an awful reason to do that to somebody. I only hope that you yourself never or know anyone that it does become addicted to hard drugs like crack, because you won't recognize the person anymore, and B, yeah, when you're so addicted on a substance, and again, when you're that addicted, you don't need it because you want it. You need it to literally live. Heavy crack, heroin, even if you're a bad enough alcoholic, if you just quit cold turkey, you will die because your body will go into shock. So, is it a great reason to do this? Somebody, no. Do I get it? Yes, I do. Unfortunately, yeah, I do. I do get it.
Well, TJ, again, you've done an amazing job of recapping horrific crimes by some really evil people within our episode.
This is a good one.
I felt like one of the most fascinating aspects of Evil Genius was the way it explored the psychology of the people involved in the case. The series delved into the troubled past of all the key players, including Marjorie's history of mental illness and Barnes's criminal past. It really put you into the mindset of all involved, especially with the footage they were able to show from law enforcement and the producer. Mm-hmm. Now, as usual, we like to add some interaction with our listeners. And today I received a Facebook Messenger message from one of our favorite interactive members or listeners, Amy, who sent over a morbid tour of America. Basically, it's a map of the United States that lists the most infamous serial killers from each state. Now, I can tell you, we will definitely be utilizing this for future episodes. I already started looking at the Florida one. I will not be covering the Florida one as it deals with children. But I think ultimately it's a pretty cool map. I know for episodes 10 and 12, I'm not going to stick with Netflix. I'm actually going to go over to Hulu and cover their documentary Death in the Dorms, which is a special 6-part true crime series that looks at 6 separate murders on college campuses.
Throwing a curveball at us. I like it.
Yeah. So, TJ, anything you want to leave our audience with before we sign off?
I got a few things. So, first of all, I'm not on Facebook because Facebook sucks. So, I didn't get this map. who's the Indiana? It has to be Bill Gunness.
I'll look.
It has to be. I don't know of another one actually that I just asked it out loud. Two, you may notice. I mean, it's pretty much every episode that we talk about Miss Amy on this show. And again, we know her personally. We've met her. She is a sweetheart. I've known her for over 3 years now. Met her a handful of times. Met her husband. She sends my kids snowman soup for Christmas every year. Just a sweet lady. If you're sitting there in your car or wherever on your couch, petting your dog, whatever you do when you listen to this show, and you're like, I want to be on this show, DM us. The only reason why we talk about Amy all the time is because she does. Every time you can tell when an episode drops. Because an hour later, she's DMing us. And they're always very good. She actually had an interesting one about Dr. Klein, about doing follow-up stuff. And she had a nice, lengthy one about Charles Cullen, too. Mm-hmm. If you want to go over that before we sign off, because there was a lot. A lot. And there was like one of the longest Twitter DMs I've ever gotten. I've gotten some doozies. But yeah, if you want to, and listen, she's been so interactive with us. She's going to be on a show. Now it helps. She's a great speaker, and again, she sends my kids Christmas presents. So she's bribing me, but it worked to perfection. What do you got?
So her last tweet, or not tweet, but DM to both of us was, "Great episode, guys. So I have a thought. I'm wondering if Cullen was picking his victims in relation to strong women figures in people's lives." So the two stories we talked about were one where a gentleman who was very attentive to his mother, and then the reverend whose sister was at his side while he was in the hospital. Perhaps Cullen was jealous that these people still had their female figures to where he had lost his mother. I don't know, but that was the first thing she thought of when she was listening to the two stories that we were talking about. The son-mother story is fascinating to her because Cullen did not do this under the coverage of darkness or to a comatose person. The mother was actually alert, getting ready to transfer. She screamed, told her son Cullen had pricked her, and then died later that day. What made him prick her? Why did he have to kill her so looking back so blatantly? Had he gotten away with so many deaths? He was just that brazen. Crazy. Sorry to burn up your DMs, but just had to ask. And we love getting listener information, reviews, feedback, questions. We will interact completely. I think for Cullen, though, I don't think it was the mother or strong female relationship. I think he was just a sick individual who thought he was helping people in their suffering when they really weren't suffering at all. And that's really what kind of blew people's mind, is even when they were asking him, like, hey, what's your deal, bro? He kind of said, I'm not going to tell you. So really, we can all guess as to what his excuse was, as to why he was doing what he was doing. But until he comes out and says this is why, we'll never know.
So the interesting thing about Cullen, I remember when Amy sent us that and I read it, my response was, that's an interesting thought. Because I had never considered that. So when I first started to read it, I thought, well, some of his victims were men. And then when you read it further, well, maybe it's not the embodiment of the patient, but his connection with his mother. Mind blown. Hadn't thought of it. Again, there might be some aspect to it. I don't know if it's... Here's what my personal opinion. This is what I think. Because again, possibly could be responsible for 400 deaths, making him the most prolific serial killer ever. So we're never going to know why. Because unless somehow he Gary Ridgways us and takes us to all the victims and tells us who they are and whatever. We'll never know. My guess is as he was nursing, he probably legitimately killed someone on accident, whether it be medicine of allergic to it or whatever the case was, or maybe he did it on purpose and this first one was a legit mercy killing. Either one of those things is possible. But when he did it the first time, hey, I kind of liked that. And then just started doing it. Again, once you get into that trench of, and I call it a trench because you never get out of it again. You're chasing down your brain. You these urges constantly have to be satisfied. And now it's your brain is justifying this person's suffering, even though they're not. But your brain tells you that they are. So I think that's probably what happened. But the theory of the strong woman figure in their life led to their death is magnificent.
Oh yeah.
And we, again, just like we're doing right now, we will talk about it. And if you have a great point, absolutely, we love having these talks. That's why we're here, right?
Exactly.
We're part of this true crime community, and we love talking and throwing theories out, and it's fun.
And I will say, going back to one of my previous episodes, the Murdaugh case is continuing to give stories. So they are still looking into the Stephen Smith case. One of the attorneys committed suicide, I think, or was found dead today. So
one of the Murdaugh attorneys?
Yeah. So
I didn't hear that.
Yeah. I'm trying to look up more information as it was on TikTok, and I know if it's on TikTok, it must be true, right? But no, I want to kind of get some more information on that. But, we would love to hear what of our previous 9 episodes, including this one, that you've enjoyed the most. What would you like more information on? What would you like less of? Is our intro too long? What can we do better for you, our listeners, right? This is going to be the most interactive true crime podcast. And really, that's what we're looking to do. So help us help you and make your easy listening on your route to wherever you're going while you're listening to us.
Yes.
Be better.
And I think what here on episode 9, we've pretty much covered a gamut of things now, right? We got Belle Gunness, who died in 1912. Eileen Wuornos, America's first well-known serial killer. That I will give her. Dr. Donald Klein, Murder Among the Mormons. You've done Charles Cohen. You've done
Dr. Death.
Dr. Death, Harold Shipman, which is another one that shattered my brain. And now this one, which has so many moving parts, so many people involved. So if you like an old story, I mean, I've got more from the area. I've got more older ones than I do new ones, because H.H. Holmes is right up the road here in Chicago. Do you want to hear more stuff like that? Maybe things you don't know about because of how old they are. Do you want to hear more stuff like Eileen Wuornos, who just no rhyme or reason just flew off the handle one day? And do you want more stuff like Harold Shipman or Charles Cohen, people in respected positions in society of helping nature and completely abuse their position for their own sick pleasure? Do you want to hear with more stories like Evil Genius, where we have all these inner working parts that led to this, the demise of one innocent person? That kind of thing helps us pick our stories out. Now, again, we can't hey, just keep doing stuff like Evil Genius. Like, we run out of shows in 2 months.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that popular, or not that common, but we could do these things more often. And again, I have a book over here. My wife bought me for Christmas, the True Crime Trivia book, which I think, I guess I might as well do the plugs for our network. So on March 31st, so 6 days after this airs, Friday, Filter Free Network, we're having Are You Smarter Than a Stephens, which is my last name phonetically pronounced, Part 2. But this is wrestling trivia, so I'm gonna just destroy whoever plays. But I think the time is nigh to break out this true crime trivia book and see how some of our listeners do maybe on a bonus live show on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/filter-free. Become a $10 dummy head, which is our Patreon group. There you can get shows like my other show. I have several, actually. The Filter Free Podcast. Myself, Dave, and Timmy C. They have a sports gambling show called Footballers Getting Paid with Tim and Dave, which is on hiatus until the fall. We have me and Mike Kolb on Wrestling Rewrite, where we play a wrestling booking show and rebook wrestling companies from the past. Do it the way we would like. So many other things. Bonus shows like Are You Smarter Than a Step Hens? We've done watch parties for the Royal Rumble this past January. We've done a pre-show for AEW Revolution. We're actually getting ready to do a pre-show for WrestleMania next weekend. So a lot of things that we do. And we tickle a lot of fancies: true crime, wrestling, pop culture, all of them. We do all of it. So go ahead. Again, that's www.patreon.com/filter-free. Become a dummy head. $10 dummy head. And for $10, you get all the content I just mentioned, not to mention the video of this show. You get to see just the sheer handsomeness behind this show.
Faces for radio.
I actually used to be on the radio, so that's not funny.
Well, like I said, I've been told I have a face for radio. I don't know what that means, but I just appreciated the compliment. So
No.
Yeah.
I've never mind. I was going to be mean. I was getting ready to say. So we also get video versions of Filter Free Podcasts every week. You cannot possibly consume all the content we put up. That's what I'm getting at. You get a bang for your buck. So keep an eye out for all those things. Justin, go ahead and take us home.
All right. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, remember to rate and actually leave a written review of us on your podcast source of choice. We appreciate your continued support of the podcast. And until next time, I'm Justin, and he's TJ, signing off for Evolution of Evil.
The views expressed on this podcast are ours alone and do not reflect the views of our employers.
Evolution of Evil.
I'd have the sleeping pill mixture already prepared. Person would drink it, fall asleep. That's when they would be strangled.
Do you have a boyfriend?
No.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Evil is not spurned. Evil is thought of as a spirit that needs help.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.